moved to Turin 2 years ago this month. Purchased a new home there, and I've always been interested in local communities. I came from a small town community early on when I was a smaller person, but we grew up in the community and started seeing a lot of growth. And as things grew, we moved to Douglasville, lived there about 43 years. But we decided to move to Turin because it was a little bit smaller town, more in a rural type setting. And when we moved there, I found out that as a homeowner, there were certain things in the community that needed to be addressed. And I have addressed those with the current city council. But a lot of it had to do with the code enforcement or the lack thereof. And Turin has, I think, one full-time employee and then several part-time employees. And I realized that the other people on the board were all professional people too, and they relied on information that they got from other individuals. They've hired a private company to conduct the inspections on residences. And not to take anything away from them, they probably do a pretty good job, but they report back to the city council. Well, in our particular subdivision, we found out that there were items that had not been done in accordance with the city's ordinances. And we raised those issues. And the mayor, to his credit, Alan Starr, he came out along with the engineer, Brennan, and we spoke with them, and we actually did a survey and different things. Well, as those developments go, there's certain things that have not been taken care of as of yet, and so the city's working on that. But I don't know if they would have known about it. I'm sure at some point in time they would check some things, but I don't know that it would have been totally addressed. And so I'm interested in serving the citizens of Turin to make sure that what we have, whether it be through the planning and zoning, whether it be through the fire service, that those things are in place to help the community. I know there are people from different backgrounds, and so they might not be as well adapted to some of the things that I may know through the fire service. I was a former fire marshal. I was an appointed local fire marshal through the Georgia Insurance and Safety Fire Commissioner's State Fire Marshal's Office. And like I say, just in the investigation of fires, both as the Assistant State Fire Marshal for the state of Georgia previously, and as Chief of the State Insurance Fraud Bureau, we had to look into certain things, especially as it dealt with construction and why there are failures in buildings during fire and explosion investigations that may have cost someone their life or that may cause other issues as they relate to the fire service. But also, planning and zoning takes a very important role in the development process. And I think they've got some really good people that are addressing a number of things. But from some of my past experiences, I've been able to look at when buildings are built and let's say fire hydrants. If you build something as an industrial area, but they don't have proper fire protection, and you let them go in there and build, not saying that anybody's doing that right now, that can affect your fire service ratings with ISO, which can increase the amount of money that you pay on your homeowner's insurance. So to get back to your original question, the reason I'm running for town council is I want to bring a level of expertise to the city to help those that are currently serving as mayor or town councilman and trying to assist them in that endeavor. Now, had Ms. Reimer, who was in the previous town council position, had she not decided not to run, I don't know if I would have run. Because I do think that, overall she's done a good job. She's served the city for a long time. And what I'm trying to do is, now that she elected not to run, I realize there being a position open on the council that I would try and get into the political aspect of it and protect the citizens. As I said, working with the political side of it, I've been in commissioners' offices when they question why we didn't approve a set of plans or why things occurred. And when we brought that to their attention, then they said, oh yeah. Politicians a lot of times will make codes, and then when your personnel, whether it be a building inspector or a code enforcement official of some other type, whether it be a fire official or whether it be the building official, these codes are adopted by the councils and the commissions to come in and enforce those for the safety of others. And building codes and life safety code, which fire service looks at a lot of times, a lot of those codes came about as a result of someone losing their life. I've worked as a fire investigator, and so what I look at, and working with other fire protection engineers and electrical engineers and structural engineers, we were able to discuss failures, what caused these things. And I'll give you just a prime example. Most people don't think about this. It's very small. I worked an incident as a fire investigator early in the fire service where I was the fire marshal and arson investigator for Douglas County. We were called to a home, residential dwelling, and we had fatality there. And we had several people that were burned very, very badly. And we got inside the home, and there was a kerosene heater, and we smelled gasoline. And we were very quick to get on that. We took samples, we submitted them to a forensics lab who did a quick turnaround for us, and they said, you in fact have gasoline and kerosene. Now, what we found out through the investigation was that someone had gone to the local gas station and they'd purchased gasoline and kerosene. The problem was that they were in the same pump housing. If you can imagine, gasoline on one side, kerosene on the other side. Now, you can go today and get diesel fuel and gasoline in the same pump housing. But what happens is the fuel, they have different rates at which they burn. And what had happened when they first started, they got the wrong pump handle. And this is evidenced by information that we got from the local supplier. And what they did was they cut the gas on. They probably didn't get very much, and it wasn't a whole lot. Then they quit and then put the kerosene in the same container, never realizing what the dynamics and the flash point of the two different fuels happened. Now, I won't say just that incident occurred because it happened across different areas of the nation. But what did happen was there was a code that was passed that now you can't have those two together. You can't have gasoline and kerosene in the same pump island together. But when they lit that fuel source, fill that container back up, it flashed on them. And that's what caused their death. So that's just one example. Well, I think when I say a proven leader over the years, I've held positions from paramedic all the way up to deputy fire chief in the local fire department. When I went to the state, they sought me out. I had an excellent arrest and prosecution record on arson fires. Very early on, older sheriff, Earl Lee, which a lot of people heard Earl's name, sent me to the police academy. And I became dual qualified, employed with the fire department, being paid by their salary, but under his watchful eye under the sheriff's office. And I worked with some very good investigators there. In 1997, the state of Georgia, one of the investigators asked me if I wanted a position as the assistant state fire marshal of the state arson unit. And I told him that I would apply for it, and did. And 3 years after working for that office, I was promoted to the chief of investigations for the Insurance and Safety Fire Commissioners, both over the arson unit and the Insurance Fraud Bureau. And I stayed there as the chief until 2011. I ultimately retired from the state of Georgia. I also retired from Douglas County. I went back and served my last 8 years as a deputy sheriff. I went back into the patrol division initially because of the way they had it set up, transferred over into investigations, and worked that job up till about the last 2 years when I went over to court services. I've had the opportunity to sit in courtrooms, listen to judges. I've testified both in city or magistrate courts. I've testified in state courts and federal court. So I've had a pretty broad career in a number of supervisory positions. I've been over a number of personnel, and that's what I believe that I can bring to the local community.
How long have you been in Turin? You said you moved here.
We moved in September of 2021.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm. So we're relatively newcomers. In looking over their comprehensive plan and others, I've noticed several areas. Being a small town, I realize you have a small revenue with which you have to work with. They set their millage rates. I think it's good right now at this time that they've been able to roll back the millage rate this year. I know people are struggling from the last several years with both the COVID and many other issues, the economy going up. I think that's a strong issue. They've also worked to try and pave their streets. They recently put in, and I say recently, in the last several years, a new water filtration system, since they're able to provide the water for the town of Turin. I saw that they're backing the Historical Society. Turin has pretty rich history if you read, and there's things people can go to on their website to read about that. So I think that's a strong point. I know that they're in the process of doing some downtown revitalization. Recently had, along with the county, they did some new paving on South Hunter Street. They're talking about putting in sidewalks. And I think that's strong if you're going to try and support our handicapped community. I have a special needs son, and right now he doesn't need a wheelchair or things like that, but for people that are in wheelchairs, it's very difficult to get around other than being the road. So they've been talking about sidewalks. They've also recently gone and done some work in the local community park. They've with walkways through there, and I understand there's some ongoing projects with that as well. So I think they've done a lot of positive things, and like I say, it's taken time. And talking with some that serve on the planning and zoning board, I think there's some more movement down the road. So that's what I hope to be a part of. I would say right now, some of it has to do with growth. It depends on what type of growth that you want. I know some of the past council members had talked about they needed more single-family type dwellings that were one story. Again, I think that goes to the economic level of those that are able to purchase the homes. There's also our industrial areas that are marked industrial. We need to have properly sized hydrants in order to provide the water that's needed for the protection of those areas, which again goes back to affecting our ISO ratings. I also think that there's going to be some challenges ahead because right now they're in the process and have been working on this for quite some time, a new roundabout at Highway 16 and Highway 54. And I know at one time it was discussed about replacing the bridge over the railroad there as well. So I think some of the challenges deal with infrastructure. We are getting a number of homes now all along Highway 16 between Turin and Sonoy. And that's only going to increase the traffic problem. And in doing so, you know, we need to look at that. But we also need to look at sewerage. Right now, sewerage is lacking in the community, and most of those homes, even our home and the previous large complex, the Oaks, they're also, as I understand it, on septic tanks too. So all that runs into the groundwater. Of course, I know they're properly engineered and things like that, but all those are pretty big challenges ahead, I believe. Well, again, until you get the infrastructure in, there's not a whole lot. We've lived in homes that had septic tanks. They need to be, homeowners need to take a look at what is recommended by the state of Georgia as far as clean outs on them. I mean, they're not a lifelong thing unless you properly take care of them. So,
I mean, as a council member.
Was a council member?
Yes.
I think until you have other services in place, I don't see that there's a lot right now that you can do without having septic tanks if you're going to put new homes in. Same way with large buildings, and it depends on what the building's going to be used for. We had a large metal building at one time in Douglasville. It was a teen center, and it was marked to be in an industrial area. And when they moved out, new business wanted to move in. What they wanted to put in was high hazard storage occupancy that had a lot of tires in it. Fire protection engineer looked at it and said, yeah, we can supply for the storage. Well, as a fire marshal and looking into it, we had to get with the development authority and the folks with the zoning and said, do y'all realize that they don't have sufficient water to supply what they're wanting to store in the building? Because what they were looking at was high rack storage, which increased it tremendously. When we talked with the fire protection engineer, he said, no, we didn't figure it for that, so let me check. And I know in the back of my mind that he was going through his slide rule on the other end of the phone while we were all there in the committee meeting. And he came back and he said, there's not enough water for that size main to supply the water for that business. And he said, for in-rack storage, even if I put a fire pump in, there's not enough water to supply the fire pump for that kind of storage. Now, ultimately, they had to turn it down.
So what would you do in Turin, you know?
In Turin, I'd work with the Planning and Zoning Committee. We need sewer pipes. And ultimately, that's going to lead to sewage treatment plants. And I think this is a long-term thing, but those are the things that are needed. And it also helps residential because once you get those in, any new or developing subdivisions can then tie on. I think it's very difficult to go back and expect the existing homeowners to upgrade to that. Now, I guess potentially you could, but I don't think you'd make a lot of happy folks. The first is a full-time code enforcement official. I think that'd be very important. And I'm going to give you some examples right now. And it's what we're dealing with now. And like I say, I don't want to diss the current mayor or the city council because they're working with the HOA right now on trying to get this. But the first phase of the development for Grayston Farms required to have street lights up and down South Hunter and the Lynch Road area, and all those homes. They weren't put in. Every home was supposed to have 2 trees in the yard and 30 plus shrubs for every house. They weren't put in. Things like the retention ponds. Right now, the retention ponds have not been maintained like they should be. That's where your stormwater runs off. And so there's also a pipe that's under a walkway down there that runs underneath one of our walkways that has started to fail. Again, the city's aware of all these. But I'm saying as homeowners, we don't want the homeowners being responsible for something before the property is even annexed into the city. So to get back to the original question, I think a code enforcement official, which they've talked about, they were talking about it in 2019 when that subdivision was being built. I think it's important for them to get someone in that's familiar with the codes, that can work on these things. And I also, and they're working on this now about trying to get a judge in, a magistrate judge, but we need enforcement. We need to be able to say, we're not going to issue a certificate of occupancy or approval unless these things are done. And they were told that in the beginning, and that's a lot of times they don't get accomplished or get overlooked. So that's what I would want to do.
Okay, so you want a full-time code enforcement officer and a magistrate judge in the city? Okay.
And I think the magistrate judge is probably fixing to be a thing that's going to occur. I know they're working on it. I think that they need to know that I'm sincere about what I'm saying. I think they should know that I've had many years of working with the public in a lot of different ways. I've been to a lot of instances that involve hazmat, and I'll say this is one other thing I find important, and I'm going to ride down tomorrow to see if it works. We're supposed to have an early warning system. Wheel and siren, and I understand that for weather,
okay.
it can be for hazards.
The
sirens? They used to call sirens, some of them used to call air raid warning.
Okay.
But we supposedly have one at the water tower that's at 16 and 54. I've lived there 2 years and I haven't heard it yet. You can see I wear hearing aids, but I'm not that deaf. And I will say that, I don't know if there's a problem with it, if it's a problem with the location, or if we need another one. And in that same light, for those that are a little more technologically adept and have cell phones, I'll put in a plug for the sheriff's office. Sheriff's office has got a pretty good warning system that he sends out notifications when there's bad weather in the area. And that is appreciated, but everybody may not have access to that. So that would be another thing I would want to work on.
Oh, through the city, to have Turin have a notification
Well,
system,
there are interagency agreements between city and county, and the EMA generally runs those type things. So it may be a matter of getting with the EMA director, and it may be that it's working and we just don't hear it. But I'm not the only one. I've talked to neighbors in the neighborhood and asked them if they've ever heard it, and they say no. Well, tomorrow's supposed to be a test day, 11 o'clock, so 11 o'clock I plan on being down there just to see if it works. And if it doesn't, notify somebody to get somebody out there to fix it. I think I would like for them to know also that on Highway 16, Turin being a small town, we have some speeders through there. Sheriff's Department's been down there. The State Patrol works that area as well, but I'd like to hope that we could get a little more enforcement time down there, and if nothing else, maybe talk with some of our state representatives and maybe to get some electronic speed signs down there, not necessarily a speed trap, but sometimes if you're driving through an area and you're running 60 miles an hour and it shows you're running 60 in a 35, has a tendency to make you try and slow down.